So, herzlich willkommen euch und Sie hier zu unserer Uni Romnja Ringvorlesung. Ich begrüße hier auch unser Online-Publikum. Freue mich, dass ihr euch eingeschaltet habt. Und vorab kurz einige technische Angelegenheiten. Die meisten wissen es schon, sind ja ganz viele bekannte Gesichter hier. Yunus macht Fotos. In der Regel von hinten. Wer das nicht möchte, kann sich kurz melden. Okay. Und wer eine Dolmetschung braucht auf Deutsch, wir haben tolle Headsets, die simultan übersetzen. Okay. Ansonsten war es das? Ja. Okay, und dann freue ich mich, dass wir heute Sebijan Fejzula da haben. Sebi, I'm very honored to have you, our sister, today here as a part of the Uni Romnja, that you came from Macedonia to be a part of this and hold your lecture. And I would like just to introduce you a little bit before we start. So you are a researcher at the Center for Social Justice Studies and currently pursue your PhD in human rights in contemporary society at the University of Coimbra. You are also a co-editor of the book titled State Racism, A Collective View from the Perspective of Autonomy and Racial Justice, which was published in 2023. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you did so much more, but I also think it's important to mention that you also co-founded Kale Amenge, which means Roma for Ourselves, an independent anti-racist Roma political organization dedicated to advancing the collective emancipation of the Roma people and the establishment of Roma political autonomy. And I'm very happy to have you here and
thank you so much.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay. So for me personally to be here today as part of lectures organized by and delivered by Romani women from Europe, it means that there is a hope that we are going to decolonize the current political issues around Roma issues that have been dominated by integratory approaches for too long time, and that we are actually going to really start to do politics for liberation. So I can only thank my sisters for providing that space for a different type of discussion that is most of the time excluded, especially within this kind of environment, which is academia. So thank you for that. Okay, recently, just a week ago, there was a case that I must start with that case because unfortunately it's part of what I will be talking about today. And it's the recent case of obstetric violence that our sister Marica Mihailovic suffered in Serbia by the hand of a doctor and that led to the death of her baby. And we know that this case is not any isolated case, that it forms part of an entire anti-Roma structure. And unfortunately, the loss of her baby, it's another lost life for the Roma people, right? In her words, she says, "He put his hand on my mouth, twisted my hands, threatened to knock out my teeth. He also insulted me based on my nationality, and he also told me that he would hit me and that I would have 2 skulls. I beg and beg for doctors' help to deliver me by C-section to save my child, where at that time he hits me and squeezes my jaw, threatening that he will hit me. Then, as reported, the doctor jumped on her stomach and tried to push the baby out, but it got stuck in the birth canal. Marica told the reporter, at that moment I lost consciousness and I was receiving oxygen, but the baby remained stuck. My rib was broken from that pressure and the baby inhaled meconium. She could breathe in but could not breathe out, and her heart stopped at 11 p.m. The infant was resuscitated and rushed to a hospital in Novi Sad. The next day at 6 a.m., the mom received a call that the baby died, right? So last week when I heard about this case, I felt angry. You know, before I would feel like another, but at that moment I felt so much anger because it's the type of anger that Sarah Ahmed talks about when she describes it as a judgment that something is wrong, right? We are angry about racism, about forms of violence and power that are hidden under the sign of civility and love. Your anger is a judgment that something is wrong. This anger is distinct from the traditional one that has been attributed to racialized women by the white imaginary vision as the emotional one, that woman, the racialized woman that cannot control her emotion or doesn't know how to behave in a public space, right? All the stereotypical vision. No, this is the anger that Audre Lorde describes this in her discussion of racism against black women, and she says, my response to racism is anger. I have lived with that anger, ignoring it, feeding it, learning to use it, before it laid my vision to waste for most of my life. Once I did it in silence, afraid of the weight. My fear of anger taught me nothing. Anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future is a liberating and strengthening act of clarification. Anger is loaded with information and energy. And we are angry because we know that the case of Maritza is not an isolated case, right? And we know that this case will not... And because we know that it is a case that represents so many other cases of Romani women that have suffered in silence for too long, because the violence against them has been normalized for centuries, right? And we are angry also because we know that while this case is going to hurt Roma people, to some will be in their mind for some time, but more worrying, we know that this case, along many other cases, Roma suffering will not be taken as a case study to put it as part of global politics that dehumanizes Roma people. This case will remain just one more case that will be part of the Roma suffering in Europe, and this case will not serve as a case that requests us to urgently think the politics of dehumanization against Roma that are taking place in Europe, and that's why we are angry. Okay, so for me to be able to understand this type of violence, right, to be able to demand racial justice, to be able to create processes of healing for us as Roma people, we must discuss this violence as a product of the modern European states, as a product of European modernity, right? And this is what I will try to do in today's presentation. I will shortly discuss anti-Roma violence as a product of the modern states. Within that, I will address the left movements in Europe, more specifically the white feminist movements and their role in maintaining whiteness or that same violence that is against Roma people. And finally, I will propose a decolonial approach to articulate this type of violence, a decolonial approach to Roma feminism. And when I refer to a decolonial, I mean to politics that asserts its right to existence as racialized women, no any type of women, but racialized women, right? Okay, so just in my latest article called De-Whitening Romani Women's Intersectional Experience, I write how every day for me it is becoming a huge struggle to discuss Roma women's experience. And that struggle occurs for two reasons. One, because of the unthinking, political unthinking of race and racism in the European context. And second, because of the political framework that have dominated the Roma-related issues from an integratory and civilizatory approaches. So whenever we try to bring anti-Roma racism as a colonial violence that never ended, we meet obstacles, which later on I will mention some of them. So, why there is no discussion of race in Europe? Because it is structurally denied. What does it mean to be structurally denied? In institutions, no one talks about it, even in academia, right? And as Lentit describes it, the silence about race in Europe allowed states to declare themselves as non-racist, or even more worrying, as anti-racist, while at the same time they continue to reproduce racial subordination, right? And this idea of there is no race in Europe depart from the political idea about Europe as a raceless Europe. What does it mean? Goldberg discussed about this, how after the Holocaust, right, there is an entire political creation as the human rights, rule of law, right? All these notions means there is no racism in Europe. And academia is one of the institutions that has created or contributed the most to creating power relations, has also placed the discussion of race and racism and whiteness within this unspoken subtext. What does it mean? It means that while academia has been constantly creating knowledges about racialized people from a paternalist approaches, have excluded the historical and current violence that racialized people, among those racialized people, Roma people too, are not discussed within academia. At the same time, academia discredited, excluded, or have silenced knowledges created by racialized people with the excuse that we are not academic enough, we are not objective enough, we are not scientific enough. If we write from our situated knowledges, then we are activists and we are not academics. Or if we write about the ghetto, but we are not from that imaginary ghetto that they have the idea about us, then we are not the same as the other Roma, so we are the privileged Roma, right? Or we are too radical, so we should calm down a little bit. Always finding ways to delegitimize our knowledges. And this is what academia has been doing for too long, right? So that's why for me it's very important, right, to try to bring these kind of knowledges and discussions within this kind of spaces. And here comes the feminist knowledge production, despite that the current demand of the feminist demands to produce knowledges based on situated experiences. Knowledges and experiences have shown that when the racial experience is centered in the debates, in the discussion, then we meet with obstacles, right? Because academia, including feminist studies, are not yet ready to confront their colonial production, right? So that's why decolonizing academia should not be only a cosmetic demand that nowadays we also hear, because it's becoming fashionable, right, to speak about decolonial without actually demanding to break with that structural order, to break with the colonial production, but it should be a political will to assume that the political dialogue or the academic dialogue that we are going to have does not necessarily means that has to be based on their standards, what they have settled as academic standards, right? That we can produce knowledges based on our experiences, our knowledges, and most importantly, our standards, right? That are different from what they have settled as the universal ones, right? Okay, just to make sure I'm doing good. Okay. So Roma people, and especially Romani women, are not immune to this European depoliticized context that basically excludes silence any initiatives or knowledge production on race and racism. And unfortunately, this silencing, diminishing of this type of violence that Roma people suffer in Europe has converted that we have become those people that are in a constant need of intervention. Caetano and I have published an article discussing this, that Roma became the permanent objects of intervention. Later on, I will talk more about this. Just I'm not a person who uses PowerPoint, so I don't even know where I am. Yeah, here it's okay. So to comprehend why there is this normalization of the anti-Roma violence, why the current European policies are wrapped by the integratory and civilizatory approaches, we must understand and pay attention to the historical white imaginary vision of Roma people and how those historical narratives have never been confronted. So what that allowed was nowadays to be normalized, that same historical ideology to be still exercised nowadays, but with just different modern ways. If we look at European history and those who have written about European history, we will see that key events that prove the continual oppression and that prove the historical dehumanization of Roma and genocidal acts against Roma are excluded from that history, right? We learn history which doesn't speak about those events that were key in the construction of the modern society. And here I speak about events as Gran Redada or the Great Raid that happened in Spain even before the Roma Holocaust. We speak about the Roma Holocaust. We speak about current pogroms that are completely ignored or doesn't exist on what Europe and European history is about. So in this term, right, the Roma thinker and my husband, Caetano Fernandez, argues that the conception of Roma history is a white creation about us and our ancestors that is nothing else but an ontological search for white legitimation and identity. Similarly, Magda Matacchia was here previously, points out that scholarly research has advanced the image of the uneducated, uncivilized gypsy. So this colonial idea about the Roma people, this notion about the uncivilized Roma people, date back to the 19th century when one of the fathers of what's called the gypsyologists, this is how some of us have named those white scholars that have researched Roma, gypsyologists. George Borrow have claimed that Romas have no history, right? So from there comes the notion that Roma people are incapable of organizing themselves politically, are incapable of governing themselves. So we have to teach them how they should behave, right? So as pointed out, it has been already addressed by different scholars, racialized and activists too, that this is a colonial idea. This is a colonial idea, right? That sustain the idea that racialized people, subalterns, have no knowledge of themselves, right? We are the uncivilized, so we cannot create knowledges about ourselves, and that we can be explained only by the power, which is the white, right? And here I want to recall one of my dear friend and Roma thinker, Roma poet, and militant, Elios Fernandez Garces. He published a book about poems, and in one of those poems, he responds to Spivak's question, can the subaltern speak, right? And the poet responds, the subalterns have always spoken, ask the centuries. So if we look at the centuries, our people have always been organized. We have been always speaking, just not the language that the dominant one wanted us to speak, right? So the question is never if the subaltern can speak, but the question is, can the power listen to us when we speak? Can the white listen? This is the question, right? And this is what we are trying here to articulate that. It was never whether we can speak, but it was, can we be heard in a society that is predominantly governed and run by the power? Okay, let's go. Oh, I think I need to move. Yes, no, I'm fine here, yeah. So this historical construction about the Roma people as the non-Europeans and non-humans. This is key, because even back in the 19th century, famous humanists such as Jacob Thomas concluded these black-looking hidden foreigners speaking a strange tongue were not fully humans. And this is how this is the political standpoint that we must think from about the Roma struggle. That there is a historical dehumanization of the Roma people, and that same idea is being implemented in today's society, is just in different forms, right? So even back then, our dehumanization was already there. Roma were claimed to be as, were defined as non-humans, right? And what does this lead? That we become in a permanent need of white salvation, that we will always be the ones who are in a constant need of intervention by the white, because we need to be fixed, we need to be educated, right? We need to be corrected, because we are damaging the white order, because we don't know how to behave in today's society, because we are not the people who follow rules and laws and rule of law and human rights. So we need to, that's why we are in a constant need of intervention, right? This is the idea. Okay, so ever since then, because of this idea, we need to control these uncivilized people. The main aim of the states and their institutions was to control Roma people. In the past, we have openly racist actions against Roma, and nowadays there are modern ways. I published one article on modern ways of disciplining the Roma body, and I speak about this. What are the modern ways? Just look at the ghettos. Ghettos now, the Roma ghettos in Europe nowadays can be seen as the 20th century prisons, where Roma lives are controlled, but there are no walls, right? But within that, within the Roma ghettos, we have all the different institutions that are there to control the Roma lives, from educational centers to social services to the police that is constantly there to supervise us. ERC done a very interesting research in Slovakia in one of the neighborhoods where Roma live, and they have proven that police presence is not in those neighborhoods where the hate crime is the highest, but in those neighborhoods where Roma live. Yeah. So based on this racial context, I can only bring the definition of anti-racism as a race-based system of domination that has historical roots in modernity and that obeys the construction of the white man as a model of humanity while dehumanizing all others, and this is actually what Caetano writes about it, right? As Roma, we are considered as non-humans enough, therefore we are defined as political, we are denied this political capacity to self-determination, and at the same time, to close this circle, this serves as a justification for the implementation of the integration strategy that are nothing else but a civilizatory oriented. That's why the battle against anti-Roma racism cannot be based on changing stereotypes and prejudice against about us, or changing the gadget minds about us. But we need to understand that anti-Roma racism is a system that is based and exercised from the states and their institutions. So this is the racial context that the European framework of the depoliticized Roma struggles is built upon, which is the EU Roma integratory nation, right? So there is this idea, we have these people in Europe, but they are not of Europe, right? Roma people are born, are citizens of the European countries, yet we are always considered as outsiders. Okay, so there is this idea, we have them in our countries, they are a problem because they are cultural people that don't know how to behave. They produce a problem to our white order, so what do we do with them, right? We can't be openly racist also, so we need to find ways how to discipline them. So we look at the modern ways of disciplining the Roma, which is what? Integration policy. Let's civilize the Roma. So when we look at those policies and when we understand what is the logic behind these policies, we come to a conclusion that they are nothing else but civilizatory oriented. We need to educate the Roma how to be humans enough, right? Because they are the non-humans, they're the ones who do not know how to behave. What is the problem with these policies? The problem with these policies is that when we have deaths of young people by the hand of the police, excluded. The problem with these policies is when we have real situation that real reports that demonstrate that Roma women in Europe live 11 years less than that of majority, are excluded from this kind of policy. We have a problem when we know that the prisons in Europe are full with our people because of the hypercriminalization of the Roma people, but these policies don't address this kind of issues, right? This is the problem with these policies when the racial context of our violence is excluded of the thinking about the Roma struggle in Europe, when it's not addressed, when it's only focused from a cultural perspective, because Roma people in Europe have been constructed as a social problem for the European states that needs to be dealt with, right? And this has led to exclude the institution and the state as the main agents that govern our lives, because the focus are the Roma, and what do we do with them? Well, there is a high unemployment. Well, that's because Roma, it's in their culture not to work, or because they are criminals, right? So that's why there is a high unemployment, not because no one wants to employ Roma, right? So this is the political context around Roma issue. And the most worrying, and the most worrying is that this type of policies that have dominated for too long the Roma struggle exclude the possibility to think the struggle from an anti-racist perspective, to think the struggle from a standpoint of liberation that goes beyond the idea of inclusion and integration, right? It marginalizes the possibility of thinking or demanding a reparatory actions, right? It excludes the possibility to define or to argue against the figure of the white man as a synonym of humanity, right? Because the focus are the Roma, the focus are not the states and the ones who are reproducing anti-Roma racism constantly. Okay. So, and unfortunately, the leftist movement in Europe, and more specifically, the white feminist movements and structure and agendas have contributed to excluding this discussion about race, racism, and whiteness. And this has led to the continuously racialization of Romani women, ignoring their racial experiences, the invisibilization of race, and then there is whitening of our experiences, and I will talk about this. So that's why, because feminism have contributed to not questioning this colonial ideology that is still running around us, right? They have inherited this colonial and modern ideology, and they have exercises upon other racialized people, in this case, Romani women. So it is within this context when Judith Spinoza, one of the decolonial thinkers, argues that feminism is the child of modernity because it's purely Eurocentric, right? Because they didn't challenge, they are not questioning this colonial production, they are not fighting against it, but they are reproducing it by pretending that we are all equal when we are not, right? Okay, so we discussed previously that there is an entire structure that is anti-Roma in regard to Romani women, and that those experiences are marked because of us being Roma women, right? And these narratives, precisely because are not supported, are not dealt by, are not questioned, are not discussed by the white feminist structure, they have focused solely on the gender perspective. What have contributed this? Has contributed to this idea about us as the uncivilized, right? Because it's solely discussed from the gender perspective. Well, race is completely ignored within the discussion. So when we look at it only from a gender perspective, we say, look at these poor Romani women, that we need to save them, right? Because they are in a constant oppression by their Roma patriarchal men, right? As if Roma patriarchy were something different from what patriarchy stands for, right? So these are the narratives that have been created by them, and we need to question them. Otherwise, we are not going to create any equal society if we don't dismantle these power relations that exist between us women too, right? So it is within this context that in my paper, The Whitening Romani Women's Intersectional Experience, I argue that there is an entire political framework that whitens our experience as Romani women precisely by ignoring the racial component and solely focusing on our gender experience. The moment when we sit and we have a discussion, and the first question is when we try to bring these debates into the discussion, right? And then the first question is, oh, but then you are not feminist. There is already a power relation between us, that they are always them who define what the discussion should be about. They are always them who would try to control the discussion because it is not beneficial to them to have this discussion, right? Then they have to admit that 90% of Romani women back in Macedonia are cleaning the houses of white women in the most disgrace conditions ever. Very low paid, no social security, and they are not going to have the right to pension. What they are doing? A racial exploitation of Romani women. When they go to do a protest for women's rights, do you think they argue for the rights of my mom that cleans the houses? Of course not, right? And we know this. So this is what we are talking about. And this is what makes them to be part of an entire structure called whiteness, because they benefit from our racial exploitation. And that's why it is not convenience to them to have this debate with us. Because then they have to argue that we are not equal. And then they have to argue that the slogan, we are all women, is not the same. And here is the black scholar when Spiller argues that there is no differentiation of, wait, let me read it exactly because I don't want. Yeah, when she says, there exists no relation of differentiation between white women, the empowered, and black women, but an antagonist opposition, nemesis between being and non-being. They are the being, and we are not constructed, and we are constructed as non-being. So this is the relation that we have, right? So this is not making us same women. We are not the same women. So unless we have this debate, there is no way that we will be able to create equal society, because slogans or politics frameworks as we are all equal, we are all women, what have resulted at is just diminishing, excluding, pretending that we are all equal, while there is constantly a racial exploitation going around us in any possible ways, right? It is in this context that we cannot discuss gender without understanding its racial component. And this is where I bring the decolonial feminism into our debate. This is what decolonial feminism allows us to question, which is the entire European modernity built upon the dehumanization of Roma, upon the dehumanization of non-white racialized people, right? This is where decolonial feminism allows us to see that gender women movements created solely on women's rights without understanding that gender also served as a category to be used as an oppressive tool against other. We can't, right? We can't dismantle. And the decolonial feminism allow us to read this racial construction of the modern societies, right? Because decolonial feminism, it's about giving voices and putting place those excluded, ignored experiences into the discussion, into the debate. Time good?
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, because slogan is "we are all equal." What have brought to us is just attempt to the reaction to racism, but not actually to combat the historical and political ongoing phenomenon, right? So therefore, what I'm trying to propose is a decolonial reading to all these processes, because in my opinion, the decolonial thought will allow us to place Romani women's experience as crucial in the processes of dismantling anti-Roma racism, in the processes of acknowledging that white women benefit from our racial exploitation, right? Second, will allow us to interpret, articulate, and argue that notions as multiculturality, interculturality, diversity, in this current political context, are only used as cosmetic operations that try to exclude any possibility of bringing the discussions about race and racism, right? So here also, there is no possibility to think on an anti-racist struggle, right? And then here it also becomes the tricky when you try to argue against it. So then the question is, oh, so you are against interculturality, right? No, we are not against interculturality. We are just saying how interculturality are used as a method to hide any possible discussion about racism. This is what we are saying, right? But in most of the time, in the discussion, these are the questions that we meet, right? Third, would allow us the rereading of modern capitalist colonial modernity itself, right? And here I want to bring Lugones into the discussion because she's one of the author that says that we need to look at the gender category and to understand how gender category has been used against other non-white women. And most importantly, the decolonial approach, for me at least, allows the possibility of creating an anti-racist struggle that primarily idea is to break with the idea of humanity based on the white experience, right? Because if we look at how the historical racism is being built upon, what's the idea of it, and how today is the same ideology behind, just maybe exercised in different, more modern ways, we understand that humanity is being built based on the white people, right? So we need to break with this idea of the white man as a synonym of humanity, and most importantly, would allow us the possibility to think of ideas, projects, initiatives from a different perspective than those that are settled as the universal one, right? This is where we are questioning universalism, and this is feminism has been criticized for, right? The idea of universalism, the idea of universal feminism, right? And so this is what the decolonial theory allows us to break with this idea of universalism and to create other projects, initiatives that are going to be emancipatory for the other people, for the silenced people, in this case for Romani women, because we want to think Roma women's liberation from our experiences, not from what someone else is telling us that liberation is about or what civilization is about, right? We want to break with this idea of civilization that has been dominating the European framework in the Roma struggle with it. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
That was wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. I enjoyed, and give you a few seconds break, and I'm going to ask the audience if they want a question. Ja, ein toller Vortrag von Sebijan Fejzula, und jetzt könnt ihr Fragen stellen. Wer möchte? Nadi, ich sehe, du bist schon.
Nee,
noch nicht?
Ich lasse mit den anderen den Vortritt.
Sie hat ein Mikrofon, das geht rum. Auf Deutsch oder stellen Sie die Frage auf Englisch? Mhm.
Ich dachte, ich lasse zuerst.
Ach so, okay, ich sah so aus. Okay.
Ich habe tatsächlich eine Frage.
Möchten Sie die auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch stellen?
Auf
Okay.
Deutsch, okay.
Sie?
Ja. So. Also ich frage. Also vielen Dank für den Vortrag.
Oh no, this is German. Entschuldigung, bitte.
Nee, bleibt im deutschen Kanal einfach.
Also eigentlich wollte ich warten, weil ich komme sozusagen aus dem anderen Ende des Universums. Also ich arbeite mit Roma-Mädchen in einer Schule unter anderem. Und also ich verstehe das ganze Diskurs, aber gerade mein Problem als Sozialarbeiterin ist, mit Roma-Mädchen zu tun zu haben, die etwas mehr erreichen wollen, als mit 14, 15 zu heiraten. So, also, und ich kann verstehen, dass ich ein weißes Kolonialismus und alles eventuell in meinem Kopf sehe. Meine Frage jetzt ist, ja, wir sind schuldig, eventuell weiß feministisch zu denken, Mensch, dieses Mädchen konnte ein bisschen was mehr erreichen, keine Ahnung, so. Aber meine Gegenfrage zu dem Diskurs jetzt ist, was sind Roma-Frauen, was ist ihr Ziel? So, und mein Problem zum Beispiel ist, was ist eine Identität? Also ich bin so gewachsen mit dem Konzept, dass eine Identität unter anderem durch eine Sprache definiert wird. Und was ist zum Beispiel die gemeinsame Roma-Sprache? Ich habe versucht, Berührungspunkte mit diesem Mädchen zu erreichen, die zum Beispiel durch ihre Identität, also zu ihrer Identität gehört. Und ich dachte, okay, ich versuche zum Beispiel die Romanes-Sprache zu verstehen. Es gibt keine einheitliche Romanes-Sprache. Oder ich habe noch keine Literatur in dem Sinne gefunden. Ich suche wie verrückt danach.
Aber das sind so viele Fragen.
Ah ja, sorry. Deswegen wollte ich...
Lucia, nimmst du es? Dankeschön.
Ja.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry.
I'm so
I mean,
sorry.
it just it's a perfect illustratory example of the talk I was trying to give today, because trust me, I've been for too long teaching, I mean not teaching, giving lecture at university, social activist spaces, and it's always the same questions, because it once again proves that when the discussion is about race and racism, the question will be from a gender perspective, the question will be from a cultural perspective, and then the question would be oriented of now me having to tell you how to deal with the work that you are doing, right? And I find it very interesting how come of an entire lecture that was focused on a structural violence that dehumanizes Romani women, that don't allow us to exist as women unless we go through an entire process of civilization, then the question has to be about that. It's very illustrative of the lecture that I was trying to give, because it proves once again that we are unable to have a discussion about racism in any kind of spaces. The discussion is not about some individual cases we know, right? The discussion is about an entire global structure that is formed, that exists, and that is reproduced because there is an entire structure that dehumanizes non-white people so that the white can exist. But this is the thing. I don't have to tell you what to do. You know, because if I have to spend, I'm a mom, I'm a scholar, I'm an activist, I'm an immigrant child that at the same time takes care of my family back in Macedonia. So if I have to spend time also to tell you what you have to do, I'm not gonna exist anymore because I don't have the forces, right? So you must, because it's, and trust me, it has been in so many conferences with other people when there is the white person now asking, so what should I do? I shouldn't tell you, just try you to understand what you are doing, if it's wrong or right. And if you honestly want me to answer, I will tell you, don't teach Roma people. Teach white people about what they shouldn't do as white people with Roma people. This would be my answer. I don't want to sound as arrogant, but I'm also sad, angry, and so many other emotions that it's always that questions, always the same question, you know? And it's not fair that we have so much burden to carry on with us. Now I also have to tell what you have to do. That I think it's unfair, you know? Especially within these kind of spaces where nowadays we have the opportunity to teach ourselves. I have to sit, I finish my gender study, I finished my master on gender studies in Budapest University. I didn't learn about how my Romani women suffer from the entire system, because what they have teaching me was that my Roma man is oppressing me. This is what gender studies, this is what I studied on my master. So when I went out of that school, I had to sit and teach myself about different types of feminism that have been created by other racialized women, because they couldn't find themselves identified with the idea of white feminism. But I had to teach myself, not because, you know, university is teaching us what decolonial feminism is about. No, we learned about this outside of these kind of spaces created by other women. So you can, learn about racism and try not to replicate the same idea of civilizatory approaches. I responded. I'm sorry.
I speak English? Okay. I just wanted to say this, well, first of all, it was a very, very good lecture, so thank you for that, and thank you for the whole, like, basically, explaining the whole, feminist movement, basically, white feminist movement, and what we are struggling at the moment with. And I really want to applaud you for your answer that you just gave to this, in my eyes, extremely offensive question. And I cannot... No, like, you understand English, right? Yes. Okay. So I have found, like, sitting here as a Romani, listening to such an amazing lecture from not such an old academic, I have to say, I cannot understand how someone like you are way older than me, I guess this now, that you sit here in such a space and centering white feelings, white feminist feelings, once again, after this whole lecture, was explaining you that our biggest problem is that white people and white feminist people centering their own racist ideas about us and bringing that to the center, instead of, okay, so this, as a Romani sitting here, it was impossible to listen to this question, but also that once again, our, I'm saying teacher, but I mean our, whatever, was just explaining how you genderized this whole problem, and then the first question is how young women who are 14 are not, who want more than just getting married. Like, I don't know how many Romani people you know, but this is just, I mean, everything speaks for itself, and I know I should, so ich muss es weiter weghalten. But I'm very, nervously excited at the moment.
Yeah,
so this is why I'm kind of like, I'm actually just repeating the whole question that you posed, but just to make you maybe understand how hurtful it was, like from the beginning to the end. And so there's no answer to this. I'm sorry for the girls that you are working with, to be honest. I am deeply sorry for them. Yeah. And now I would like to basically turn back to you. So to your question, to the lecture that you gave. Damn it. I was wondering about those prisons and the open ghettos that you were talking about, those ghettos without a wall. Like, you know how so many people always coming to me and to other Romani people and saying basically it's our own responsibility and our own fault that we live like that, and that we don't get out, and that we don't get into education, whatever, like, so what would you, what would you suggest beside an answer of like basically fuck you, what could be a better answer?
More politically correct.
Yes, yeah, because we need to be civilized, we cannot be so emotional, like as you said. So, yes, so this was the one question, and the other question I would have is the issue when you work as a Romani with other feminists together, and they claiming an intersectionality which is yet not there, because, so, yeah. And what you don't say, what you don't want is to educate them 24/7, right?
Yeah.
I'm also so tired of it. But how then to work with them together? Because it's either we are like, how do you say, emancipating us and only being under us, or like, but we kind of have to deal with them. So if you have any more tips than what we are already all doing, I'm highly grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have to be more political so that the first response cannot be so. I mean, what we have basically to say about the Roma ghettos or many other ghettos that unfortunately exist in Europe and are constructed as places of criminality, places to be afraid of, right? Because this is where Roma people live, and they're criminals and they do many other stuff, and those places are people live in the worst conditions ever. And I remember once talking to a Roma woman who told me that they ordered a TV and then the delivery guy didn't want to enter the Roma ghetto because those are the places to be afraid of, you know. And we have, I mean, this was in Portugal, but it's the same. Probably they speak the same about my place of ghetto in Shutka in Macedonia, right? So what we have to understand is that we don't decide to live like this, right? No one decides to live in those miserable conditions. So the system put us to be there, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They placed us to be there. It is not our decision to be there. So, as we also don't have the power to destroy those ghettos, right? We don't have the power to destroy them, and they will exist. Now, one of the things that we also started to think about it was that because we know the power, we know that we don't have the power to destroy these ghettos. So now, let's turn the table and think how we can use those places as places of empowerment, as places where Roma can build autonomy, as places where we can build self-determination, right? As places that can be run, governed by us. Mm-hmm. We are trying to explore this possibility, right? At least to create them, to see if there is a possibility to make these places to be less controlled by all the other institutions, because you have the police, you have the social services, you have the educational services that are there monitoring every step of the parents they are doing, so they can take the children, right? The first thing they do is they take their children because, oh, you are bad parents or whatever, you know. No one understands, no one does an entire analysis of why these people are there. Why? Because if we look at how Roma issues in Europe have been constructed, I call it the racial circles. They enter the ghetto. First, they do an analysis of the situation. Then there is the second step, which is project-based activities with these people. And the third one is the report, which they come to the same conclusion that they have to do another intervention. So that's why we are in a constant need of intervention. This is the racial circle that have dominated at least the Roma issues, and I know that it's not that different, you know, what, let's say, the black community in Portugal is suffering. It's the same. So this would be, and then about intersectionality, and what I argue in the paper that I publish is that in this current political context, intersectionality as a theory, as a practice, as a tool, has been whitened by the left, by the white feminist movement solely, right? By either or focusing on the gender perspective, or arguing that all the intersects have the same power. Now the question is, simple question. Can we understand class issues without understanding capitalism, actually without understanding racial capitalism? Can we? No, it's simple. So not all intersects are like this. It's not an Olympic of oppression. It is not. Because race is the one that constructs all the others. That's why we cannot understand class without understanding capitalism, or in fact racial capitalism, right? So this is the debate. The debate is, we must first now de-whiten what has been, right, created by the black feminist movements to serve as an emancipatory tool, because it had got whitened in this current policies of we are all equal, and have placed all the intersects as if they have the same power. Experiences have shown that they don't. But it's a long process. Thank you.
thank you for your lecture. Thank you very much. What got me thinking is that I think in the beginning you said that being here and doing this lecture makes you feel hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about this white feminism and colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I'm trying to ask my question, but I don't know if I will succeed. I was thinking that doing this lecture in this building, in this room, in this building that is kind of charged with colonialism and colonialist history and thoughts, is that your ideal setting? And if not, what is? Because for me, as a white person who studies at this university, it is very easy to access this lecture.
Yeah.
And like, I don't have to put much work into receiving these informations from you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I have the resources to put more work into getting information without like marginalized people like Romnja and Sinti having to kind of take over these spaces that are so, I don't know, white. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm trying to say.
Let me just repeat so I see if I understood the question well. Your question is...
No, I think, could I try to ask my question in short?
Yeah.
What would be your ideal setting for a lecture like this? What would be like your wish for the future? Or maybe your utopia is to not have to hold lectures like this anymore?
Okay. So, what we need to understand is that no matter if I'm standing here or if my sister have organized or not these lectures, this institution, academia, will continue to exist, will continue with its colonial production, with its colonial reproduction of paternalist knowledge about the others, right? Because they are the main producers of knowledges about the other people. So, for me, the question is not if this is my ideal scenario to be here. You know, it's I think because even if I'm not here, all this colonial production will continue. For me, the question that matters for us to think about, even when we leave these spaces, is what do we do to decolonize academic institutions so that they stop to produce knowledges based on colonial ideas about the other racialized people. I think this is a question, you know, we must think about it, or what is our role as future researchers, right? Because we try to give these knowledges so that we leave these spaces. When we leave these spaces, we have a different types of knowledges that are not traditionally offered by these kind of institutions, right? So let's think what's our role as future researchers and how we can try to decolonize academia. It's going to be a very long process because it means to deconstruct, to destroy all entire system that has been sustained and maintained because of these colonial power relations, because of this European superiority, right? So I think it will be more interesting for us to think on these terms. I also think that when possibilities are offered to us as Roma, even in these kind of spaces, we should take it and tell our truth, because in these kind of spaces, our truth are not told. So we are here to speak our truth and to dismantle all this structure that exists because of our oppression. Yeah.
I add something. Yeah. Can I have the flyer? 1 second. I think it suits very well here, because that's what we put on our flyer as well. dear people, it's our turn to add to this new world our own narratives. It's a quote from Papusha. So I think basically, that suits the whole lecture and also your answer.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Adam, yeah.
And I would also just, so it's far away enough. So I would also add, if you don't mind, to this question, because as you mentioned, as a white person, you have easy access to this institution or to knowledge in general. I have made this shocking experience that even though there is the internet now called World Wide Web basically, and we have many Romani scholars all over the world, somehow white people don't tend to educate themselves about us, about our history, when the knowledge comes from us. So it would be lovely if we would not have to be in university, but actually it is also the opposite, which I just agree, that we are never seen in these institutions. So this for me is a taking over the place. Yes. This for me is a empowerment space where we are actually entering a place where we have never been seen before. As teachers, as scholars, as educators. So even though this is a violent institution itself, but all universities are extremely violent towards all marginalized, racialized, marginalized groups, not only towards Roma. So I am just happy that she's here and that you're here, and also to Romani Pen, who's actually organizing this, and everyone who wants to educate themselves, I please once again say you can go to Romani Pen and find the archives, and there's so much knowledge there. So I want to say thanks for being here and taking it over, you know, like let's take it.
Thank you, Nadi. Thank you, Sebi. There any more questions? Gibt es noch Fragen oder Kommentare? Isidora? Rangelovic?
Okay, I will start in English and go on in German, I think. So first, thank you very, very much for the really powerful and beautiful speech or lecture today. And what I'm thinking or what I'm asking myself is, how do you think about, like my sister Svetlana, she said we used Papusha, and this is a method or a strategy like to take something from the real world, from the Romani Pen, to bring it into the academia as a strategy of interruption and changing. And there are some different ways we deal with decolonization, like what is an archive? For us, it's an oral archive. It's storytelling, because we have to work against the methods of documentation, segregation, and now my English. Yes, but you know what I mean, yes? What an archive usually is, and so on. So we, as Romani women, have also, like in Black feminism, have a century-old, I would call it Romani feminism, but practices of person who, like through oral history or through other mothering, because you had to, when your people are killed, you have to take other children, or when they're in jail, and so on. So we have different practices of Romani feminism, or surviving, and I just would like to know what are your favorite, it sounds stupid in English, but you know what do you think about this? Where is our power for decolonization and for fighting structures as Romani feminism? I think there are a lot of different, but maybe you can I'm just interested in your way. What do you think are good strategies, or maybe wonderful persons where you can give an example how decolonial practice can work?
Okay. I absolutely agree everything what you said. I think that the colonial practices, the way I understand, right, it's about looking at what our ancestors have done to survive, have lived, right? Because the decolonial is about decolonizing what is the current politics about rights. So to do that, right, we must look at, you know, how our people, how our ancestors used to fight, used to live, used to celebrate everything, right? And I look at that, right? At this moment, I cannot take a name to hold on, but we built our fight based on what our ancestors claimed as an autonomy, as a self-determination and organization, right? And we want to apply that ways on our current ways of organizing ourselves. What decolonization for me is, just to give an example, the lectures that you are giving right now, right? And for me, it's very powerful. And I think I've also written about it in the article that I published with Romani Pen. I write about this, that if there is a discussion about race and racism in regard to the Roma struggle in Europe, it's because of the Roma activists, Roma women activists and Roma scholars are the only ones that really brought the discussions about race and racism and the racial experiences of Roma. So for me, one of the steps, that's why I said at the beginning that for me it's very helpful to this, because it means that there are different ways of organizing, of thinking our suffering, of thinking our existence, and even better if connecting it to our ancestors' beliefs and organizing an existence. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Okay. Well, thank you for that input. That was pretty good. I mean, damn, that was good. I'm sorry to use that language. And yeah, even though you said you don't use PowerPoint that often, that was also a good presentation. Thank you for that. So my roommate is from Macedonia. He's actually Albanian, but that's pretty common. I don't know if you know the city. He's from Tetovo.
Yeah.
And recently we talked about how people behave in Macedonia and treat each other. And treat each other. Treat.
Ah, okay.
And
yeah.
And in that context, I'm interested how Roma and Sinti people are treated in Macedonia.
Okay.
And you already gave a good example with the cleaning workers. But maybe you could give some more everyday examples, and maybe if you want to, also some personal examples. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I try not too often to bring the Macedonian context into my discussion because it's very distinct from all the other European countries. And why? Because in Macedonia, the minorities, which is what we are fighting to hopefully to do it in the other countries, the minorities or the racialized people are officially recognized as minorities, are officially recognized. What does this mean? That based on the percentage of the population that we are, that much percentage we have the right to have political representation, right? That's the first thing. That also means that we have the right to have our own political parties. We have the right to have, for example, what makes the ghetto I come from a bit different from the European ghettos is that it's run by us. We have Roma mayors. It's cool that the police officers are Roma, so you know there is not that much police persecutions and as in the other ghettos. For example, the director of the high school and the primary school is Roma. There are Roma professors there, not entirely, but there are Roma professors there, right? So it's very distinct from the other European context. You know, I bring the Macedonian case when I'm talking about the importance of political representation, because the importance of political representation means having the right to self-organization, which is what is happening right there. So because of this census and the political representation. And because of the different minority that lives in Macedonia, Macedonia have to be built as an intercultural country, because it's basically run, right, by the two population that lives, which is the Macedonian and the Albanians as the second biggest minority. So do we have tensions? Of course, yes. Does racial exploitation exist? Of course, yes. What's the difference? That at least we can try to have a political debate about that, right? This is the difference, because we have a political representation, and because there is emerging a strong movement run by activists that try to bring this kind of debates within those that are framing policies and politics about us Roma. So this would make the Macedonian context different from the other European countries. Yeah, which I think it's a huge difference, that is also what we are trying to demand, right, for the other. I don't want to enter in the debate, but it's something that we are having it, the right to census, right? And one of the arguments that we hear against it is that, oh, but then how you are going to organize it? Then, the police is gonna know where we live. The police already knows where we live, right? So we don't want to have, how it's called? It's not called, we don't want to know where we live, who lives, if Kako Jaško lives there or if Kako Ramazan live there. No, what we want to know is how many we are, right, in order to have the right to self-political representation. This is what we want to know, right? We want to have numbers so that we show that there is hyper-criminalization of Roma in the prisons. We want to know the numbers to show that there is the judge is racist when he puts Roma more in prison than other people. We don't have these numbers officially, but we know them because we come from the neighborhoods and we know, right? We have the case of Portugal, that the judge openly condemned that person because he wrote in his statement that Roma are naturally prone to criminality. So the sentence against that person was higher than what's the usual sentence about that crimes is, because we have the tendency to be criminals, so we're going to put them in the prison longer. So we want the numbers to show, right, that there is hypercriminalization against Romani people, right, and for so many reasons, and to right to the self-determination, to self-organization, autonomy, and so on. But it's a debate for another day.
Thank you. Are there further questions or comments? One second, let me.
Sorry, we can also just do one-on-one.
Let's. Manuela, you wanna? Oh, okay. Can I have one question before you continue? I was just thinking through the whole lecture, and when you mentioned the first example with the woman that just lost her baby, Maritza. Mm-hmm. And through the whole lecture, I was thinking, and the question arose in my mind as we talk, and as I know you're doing your PhD in human rights, and as we know, there are so many different human rights declarations since 1948, the Universal Human Rights Declaration, and so on, CEDAW. So what my question is, do you believe the Romani people have human rights at all? Do the universal human rights count for us Romani people?
No. I mean, this is what we argue against. We argue against the individualization of human rights. What's that? Human rights are built after the Holocaust, right? After the Holocaust, there is an entire structure of diversity, human rights, rule of law, right? Those are based and are meant to serve for the people, and not for the racialized people. So if we say that we are considered as non-human, so human rights are not really applied to us. And when I say not really applied to us, I mean it's a collective. There comes the critique to the human rights and their individualist approach. I'm not interested in myself as, I am, yes, of course, it's perfect to have my rights as Sebijan Fejzula, but what I'm interested is to have my rights as Sebijan Fejzula, who is part of a collective. We want the collective rights, which is what the human rights are making an obstacle the right to collective rights, because they say, well, we cannot give you collective rights, you have your human rights already. That's why they are individual. And in this current political system, because there is open anti-Roma racism, breaking someone's human rights is not such a big deal, because most of the people think, well, they deserve it, or it's for their good, right? Which is what I missed from my presentation. You know, we can look at the global anti-racist struggles, and we will see that we are not even part of those struggles. Why? Because Roma issues have been constructed as an exceptional, which is what I call the Roma exceptionality. Yes. That, you know, oh, let them do their stuff, they have their own policies, they have their own thing. And that is, we are thinking like this because we have been excluded from the global thinking about race and racism. When we learn about race and racism, it is not based on the Roma experience. We don't exist in this debate, right? So we are there, we are not part of the global thinking. And many often, I mean, just few years ago, there was the Afro-European conference going on. It was organized in Portugal at the university there. The team that organized are my good friends, was organized by black women and other racialized women, and they wanted the focus to be racism, and I was invited to the table. What happened? The first question was a racialized guy standing up and asking, what is a Roma doing in an Afro-European conference? Why? Because it is not used as to be part of the debate. We are not seen as part of the debate because we are constructed as a social problem, right? Anti-Roma racism is not taught as a phenomenon of whiteness, which is the same, and this is why for us creating alliances with other racialized movements is key. We need to bring our struggle within the global thinking, so we break with this Roma exceptionalism, and yeah. That's it.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered, I just went somewhere.
No, it's perfect. And it makes sense. Right. Ich würde noch mal fragen, gibt es im Raum hier noch mal eine Frage? Wenn nicht, dann würde ich abschließen mit dir, Nadi, dass du jetzt noch the last question.
I'm sorry, dear. Damn it, you said so many amazing things now that, but I wrote them down. And now I'm getting too excited about those last things. Okay, so I just throw the questions in and then I end, and then you can answer if you feel like it, if you would want to. Like the first question, it was, I came back to this Macedonian thing, and when you said the Albanians are the second biggest group,
Yes.
I was wondering, we talking about Albanian Romnjas, or you be talking Romani people, or they just normal Albanians?
No, we are talking Albanians. They are
Like white Albanians, basically, the white Albanians. Okay, so this was then already the answer. I think it's the first time, and I want to really say thank you for that, that I hear this very strong distinguishing between human rights versus collective rights, because everyone that I know who works in human rights and blah, 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 are always like amplifying as we have the Human Rights Declaration, we could use them and blah, and now to see that we actually should maybe strive for collective rights is a really amazing way of thinking, so thank you for that. And then the last thing, it's a question I have all the time, in which I'm mostly, I don't want to sound that I make a division between us and other racialized groups.
Okay.
But when you say about this, that we are not being seen as humans, and that since the Romani Holocaust, why do you think, or where do you see, like, how, why how come that we are still being seen as the social problem, or still are being why did we not gain humanity? You know what I mean yet? You understand my question? Like, I mean, because others, after the Holocaust, for example, some, like Germany, paid a high attention to rehumanize the Jews, for example, but only after they were dead, of course. They were able to see them as humans, and the world were able to see them then as humans. But how come we are still not being rehumanized? Like, you get my point?
Yeah, I get your point, and I would say, I would answer like this. I mean, at the beginning I asked myself, now I stopped to ask myself because I came to the conclusion. I was saying to myself, can we imagine a Europe without racialized people? Or I was thinking, well, if they want the elimination of all Roma from Europe, they could very easily do it because we have no political forces, we have no military, we have nothing, and they could easily do it. But that's not the purpose. Why? Because the purpose is we need to have them so that we reproduce whiteness. I need to have racialized people, I need to have Roma people in Europe so that whiteness is constantly maintained. If we argue that whiteness is maintained, is reproduced by the exploitation of the racialized people, right? So we have whiteness, and then we have racialization, dehumanization of others, of Roma, right, of racialized people, so that whiteness is constantly maintained, because whiteness is maintained because there are processes of racialization, because there is dehumanization, because there is exploitation. This wouldn't exist without this. They go hand by hand. Do you understand me? So with us, it's not the goal of humanizing Roma. No, we need them to be like this so they are easily dehumanized constantly. Do you understand me? Yeah. Because this one wouldn't exist without this one, right? That's why these types of debates are not comfortable. That's why they are they bring disturbances to others, because this is when you mention privileges. This is where you attack their comfortable position. And we saw it so very easy with the Black Lives Matter protest in US, when, you know, white Europeans were easily seeing race and racism in US and questioning what is happening there and demanding that type of violence to end, while they are incapable of seeing the violence that is happening in their own houses. Why? Because then they will have to question their own comfortable position, their own privileges, and how they are maintained. It's very simple. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebi. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. And thank you very much. So I just have a few words. I must say it in German. I can even say it in English.
Go ahead.
There was I'm gonna try in English. There was our 14th lecture today. Was the last lecture. We had 14 wonderful lectures, and at the same time, I want to say to all the participants, all the Romnjas that came and took the effort and were part of the Uni Romnja, we appreciate, in the name of Romani Pen, the Uni Romnja, the Uni Romnja team, very glad and very honored and very happy. And but it's not over yet. We have 2 more roundtables to come. And just to go back to the lecture, so if you missed out the lecture, please, you're welcome to find them on our YouTube channel. We have them saved there. They are uploaded now as the stream, but will slowly but surely, by our wonderful camera team, and technical support team be edited and subtitled, so will be accessible in different languages, German and English for now, but hopefully Romanes soon. And yes, now next week we're gonna have a roundtable here with Fatima Hartmann, Anita Avujuzzi, Petra Rosenberg, Rosa Gitter-Martel, Nicole Sevic, and my sister Tayo Avujuzzi Onotra is going to be moderating this roundtable, and it's on feministic positions from the civil rights and human rights movement, history, knowledge, and visions. So besides that, I really don't have nothing to add, just to thank my Romani Pen team and greet them all, and I'm very grateful for what we done for now. And yeah, Opre Romnja.